She pulled a man from the rainstorm, only to learn he owned the entire building she lived in. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. It was a cold, rainy night, and the streets of the city were nearly empty, save for the few people rushing to get out of the downpour. Among them was Sarah, a young woman who had just finished her shift at the diner. Her feet ached from standing all day, and her stomach growled in protest. She was walking home, her worn-out shoes slapping against the wet pavement, when she heard the faint sound of a man coughing nearby. Turning her head, she saw a figure standing by the edge of the sidewalk, his hands wrapped around himself, shivering uncontrollably from the cold. He was drenched, his clothes clinging to his body as he stood motionless, clearly struggling with the weather. Without thinking, Sarah rushed toward him. "Hey, are you okay?" she asked, her voice soft but urgent. The man looked up, his face pale and weary, his eyes glazed over from exhaustion. He nodded faintly, but it was clear that he was in no condition to be standing in the rain. Sarah quickly reached out, placing her hand on his arm to steady him. "Come on, let me help you," she said. With a gentle but firm grip, she guided him toward the small cafe nearby. The man's steps were slow and unsure, but Sarah kept him steady, one hand on his back, leading him into the warmth of the cafe. Once inside, Sarah helped him take a seat at a table by the window. She ordered him a hot coffee and wrapped him in her own jacket as she tried to comfort him. The man, still shivering, looked at her with a mix of gratitude and confusion. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice hoarse. Sarah smiled softly. "It's nothing, really. Just trying to do something right for once." They sat in silence for a few minutes, the only sound being the steady hum of the coffee machine and the occasional drip of water from Sarah's jacket. She couldn't help but notice how out of place he looked. His clothes, though drenched, were clearly expensive. His shoes were designer, and the watch on his wrist caught the light even through the wetness. Sarah didn't think much of it. She had helped many people before, and it wasn't about their status. It was about doing the right thing. After a while, the man began to speak again. "I wasn't sure if I'd make it out of that storm," he said quietly. "I didn't expect someone to help me." Sarah shrugged, trying to brush off the compliment. "Well, you look like you needed it. I wasn't going to leave you out there." The man chuckled softly, though it was more of a tired sigh than a real laugh. "I guess I owe you more than just a thank you." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "It's fine, really. Just take care of yourself." She didn't expect to see him again, and honestly, she didn't think about it too much as she finished her shift and headed back to her apartment. But as fate would have it, the next day, as Sarah was walking into her building, she saw a familiar face. The man from the storm was standing in the lobby, dressed sharply in a tailored suit, his hair neatly styled. He looked nothing like the drenched stranger she had helped the night before. He was now clean, put together, and exuding a quiet, commanding presence. Sarah froze, unsure if she was imagining it. You're the man from last night," she said, her voice unsure. The man looked up, recognizing her immediately. "Yes, I am. I didn't get a chance to properly introduce myself," he said, walking toward her. "I'm Mark Donovan. I own this building." Sarah's eyes widened in shock. The building she had lived in for years, scraping by each month to make rent, was owned by this man, the very same man she had helped out of the rain just the night before. She felt her heart race. "Wait," she stammered, still trying to process. "You own this building?" Mark nodded, his expression a mix of seriousness and amusement. "Yes, I do. And I wanted to thank you for your kindness last night. It's not every day someone helps a stranger without expecting anything in return." Sarah felt a sudden rush of embarrassment. She had no idea who he was. She had just thought he was another person caught in the rain. But now, as she stood there, realizing the extent of his wealth and influence, she felt out of place. She hadn't done it for any reward, just for the simple act of kindness. "I didn't expect anything," Sarah said softly, looking away. Mark studied her for a moment before speaking again. "I know, and that's why I respect what you did. You didn't care who I was. You just helped." His voice softened, and for the first time, Sarah saw the weight of the world in his eyes. He wasn't just a wealthy man. He was someone who had seen life through a lens of power and privilege, but he had never felt what it was like to have someone help him without an agenda. "I want to offer you something," Mark continued. Sarah glanced at him, still unsure of what was happening. "I don't know if you'd be interested, but I'm looking for someone with your kind of heart to help with a project I'm working on. It's a big one, and it requires someone with your integrity." Sarah was taken aback. "A project?" Mark nodded. "Yes, I think you'll find it interesting." She wasn't sure what to make of this sudden offer. What did he want from her? But as she looked into his eyes, she saw sincerity. Perhaps this was just the beginning of something unexpected, something that would change both their lives. But what would it mean for her? And could she trust him? The uncertainty hung in the air, but deep down, she felt something stirring, a chance at something more. Something beyond her usual, ordinary life. And just like that, Sarah realized her life might never be the same again. Sarah was still in shock as she stood in the lobby of her building, trying to process the fact that the man she had helped the previous night, the man who had been cold and wet, was now standing before her in a suit, his demeanor calm and composed. She felt a little out of place in her old, worn-out coat, her tired eyes not matching the polished image of Mark Donovan. He had made an offer that had caught her completely off guard, an invitation to help with one of his projects. Sarah wasn't sure what to say, and for a moment, there was an awkward silence between them. Mark smiled faintly, sensing her hesitation. "You don't have to say yes right away, but I'd like you to think about it. There's something about you, Sarah. You did something kind without asking for anything in return, and that's rare." Sarah swallowed, her mind racing. Was this really happening? Was a billionaire offering her a chance to work on a major project? A project she knew nothing about? She had never been given such an opportunity before, but she couldn't help but feel out of her depth. I don't know if I'm the right person for the job," Sarah finally said, her voice soft. "I mean, I'm just a waitress. I don't have the kind of experience you might be looking for." Mark leaned against the counter, his expression thoughtful. "You'd be surprised what you're capable of when you're given the chance. It's not about experience, it's about heart. And you have that. You helped me without a second thought. You saw a person in need, and you took action. That's more valuable than you think." Sarah couldn't argue with him. She had never been the kind of person to wait for someone else to help. She had always been the one to step up, to do what she could, and it had felt good to help him. But now, facing the reality of a job offer from someone like Mark Donovan, she wasn't sure if she was ready. What if she failed? What if she didn't measure up to his expectations? "I'll think about it," Sarah said finally, unsure of what else to say. Mark gave her a nod of approval, his eyes warm. "Take your time. I'll give you a call next week, and we can talk more about it. And if you ever need anything, don't hesitate to reach out." As Mark turned to leave, Sarah stood there, still processing everything. What was she even supposed to do with an opportunity like this? Was she ready for it? It was hard to say, but for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt a small spark of hope flicker inside her. Maybe, just maybe, this was the chance she had been waiting for. The next few days passed in a blur. Sarah couldn't stop thinking about the conversation with Mark. The thought of working with someone like him was both thrilling and terrifying. She spent the weekend talking it over with her best friend, Jenny, who had always been the more optimistic one. "What do you have to lose, Sarah?" Jenny said as they sat on the couch together. "This could be your shot at something more. Don't let fear hold you back." Jenny's words resonated with Sarah. She had always been afraid of stepping out of her comfort zone. She had always believed that people like her, people who grew up poor and struggled to make ends meet, didn't get second chances. But here was Mark, a man who had everything, offering her a chance to prove herself. What if she didn't take it? What if this was the only opportunity she would ever have? The next day, Sarah made up her mind. She called Mark's office and left a message saying she was interested in hearing more about the project. A few hours later, she got a call back. Mark's voice was warm and welcoming, as always. "I'm glad to hear you're interested, Sarah. Let's meet up tomorrow. We can go over the details of the project." The meeting was set for the following afternoon, and Sarah spent the night preparing. She didn't know what to expect, but she wanted to be ready. The next day, she arrived at a sleek, modern office building in the heart of the city. As she stepped into the lobby, she felt like a fish out of water. The building was nothing like the shabby apartment complex she called home. The polished floors, the expensive furniture, the clean, open space, it all made her feel small. She was greeted by a receptionist who directed her to an elevator. As the doors closed, Sarah tried to steady her nerves. She wasn't used to this kind of environment. She wasn't used to being around people who had it all together. But she had to remind herself that this was an opportunity to prove herself. The elevator doors opened to the top floor, and Sarah stepped out into a sleek, contemporary office. Mark was waiting for her, standing by a large window that overlooked the city. "Welcome to my world, Sarah," he said with a smile. "I know this is probably a little overwhelming, but I want you to feel comfortable. Let's sit down and talk." Sarah nodded, trying to calm her racing heart. As they sat down at the conference table, Mark began to explain the project he was working on, a community initiative aimed at helping underprivileged youth get access to education and career opportunities. It was a cause that Sarah could relate to deeply. She had grown up in a struggling family, and she knew how important it was to have someone believe in you. Mark spoke with passion about the work his company was doing, and Sarah found herself feeling more and more inspired by what he was saying. This wasn't just a job offer. It was a chance to make a real difference in people's lives. "I need someone who's willing to roll up their sleeves and dive into this with me," Mark said, his voice earnest. "I think you're the right person for the job, Sarah. What do you think?" Sarah's heart raced as she realized that the decision was in her hands. This was her chance to be a part of something bigger than herself. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I'm in," she said, her voice filled with determination. Mark smiled, his eyes lighting up with approval. "I knew you would be. Welcome to the team, Sarah." As she left the meeting, Sarah couldn't believe what had just happened. She had taken the leap. And now, her life was about to change in ways she never could have imagined. "I'm in," Sarah had said, her voice filled with determination. Mark smiled, his eyes lighting up with approval. "I knew you would be. Welcome to the team, Sarah." As she left the meeting, Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and disbelief. She had taken the leap. Her heart was pounding as she made her way out of the sleek office building, the glass doors sliding open with a soft hiss behind her. For the first time in a long time, Sarah felt like she was on the verge of something big. This wasn't just a job. It was an opportunity to change her life. As she stepped out onto the sidewalk, she couldn't help but smile to herself. This was real. She was finally going to make a difference. The following weeks were a whirlwind. Sarah threw herself into the project with everything she had. She was in charge of organizing events for local schools, helping underprivileged youth find internships, and setting up mentorship programs. It wasn't easy work, but it felt rewarding. For the first time in years, Sarah felt like she was doing something meaningful. Mark was there every step of the way, offering guidance when she needed it, but giving her the freedom to make decisions on her own. He was more than just a boss. He was a mentor. As the days passed, Sarah found herself opening up to him more and more. They started talking about their lives outside of work, things that weren't related to the project. Mark had grown up in a wealthy family, but he had always felt disconnected from them. He had worked hard to build his empire, but it had come at the cost of his relationships. "Sometimes I wonder if all the money in the world is worth it," he had said one afternoon, after they had wrapped up a meeting. "I've built this life, but I don't really have anyone to share it with." Sarah had been surprised by his vulnerability. She had always seen him as a man with everything, someone who had it all together. But now, she realized he was just like her, someone searching for meaning, for connection. "I get that," she had said softly. "I've spent most of my life just trying to survive. But now, I'm learning to live." Mark had nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his lips. "I think we're both learning." As the weeks turned into months, Sarah became more involved in Mark's personal life. She learned that he had been married once, but it had ended in heartbreak. His wife had left him for someone else, and the pain had stayed with him. Sarah could see the emotional walls Mark had built around himself, walls that had protected him but also kept him isolated. One evening, as they were working late, Sarah found herself sitting next to him in his office, the soft glow of the desk lamp casting shadows on their faces. She looked at him, noticing the tiredness in his eyes. "You're not alone, you know," she said gently. Mark looked at her, surprised by her words. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you don't have to carry everything by yourself," Sarah said. "You've got people who care. You've got me." There was a long silence between them, a quiet understanding passing between them. Mark didn't speak right away, but when he did, his voice was softer than usual. "Thank you, Sarah," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "I don't say it enough, but I appreciate everything you've done." You've made a difference in more ways than just this project. The words meant more to Sarah than she could explain. For so long, she had felt like she was invisible, like no one saw her. But here was Mark, a man who had everything, acknowledging her worth, seeing her for who she really was. It was a feeling she had never thought possible. As the project continued to grow, so did Sarah's confidence. She found herself taking on more responsibility, making decisions that had a real impact on the community. But with each success, the connection between her and Mark grew stronger. They started spending more time together outside of work, going for walks, grabbing dinner, talking about their hopes and dreams. They had become friends, but Sarah couldn't deny the growing attraction she felt toward him. She had tried to ignore it, but it was becoming harder and harder to push aside. Mark, too, seemed to be looking at her differently. The way his eyes lingered on her when she spoke, the way he smiled when she made a joke, it all felt like more than just friendship. Sarah knew she had to be careful. She didn't want to jeopardize the bond they had built, especially not over something that might just be a fleeting attraction. But the tension between them was undeniable. One evening, as they were wrapping up another long day, Mark asked her to stay a little longer. He wanted to show her something. "It's a surprise," he said, his voice carrying a hint of mystery. Sarah agreed, curious about what he had in mind. They walked together to the rooftop of the building, where Mark had arranged for a small table and chairs to be set up. The city lights shimmered below them, casting a golden glow across the skyline. "What's all this for?" Sarah asked, her voice tinged with surprise. Mark smiled, his eyes warm. "I wanted to thank you," he said simply, "for everything you've done, for believing in me, for believing in this project, and for being there when I needed someone." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "Mark, you don't have to do this. I'm just doing my job." Mark shook his head, his expression serious. "No, you're not just doing your job. You've changed my life, Sarah. You've given me hope again." As he spoke, the weight of his words settled in Sarah's chest. She had never expected to hear him say something like this, but it felt like the start of something bigger than just their professional relationship. As they sat together under the stars, Sarah couldn't help but wonder where this connection would lead. She had started this journey unsure of herself, unsure of where she belonged. But now, she felt a sense of belonging she had never known before. She was exactly where she was meant to be. The days that followed the rooftop dinner marked a subtle shift in Sarah and Mark's relationship. It wasn't just the shared work or the late-night conversations. They had begun to rely on each other in a way that felt comfortable, yet different. Sarah found herself thinking about Mark more often than she expected. She could still feel the warmth of the evening, the way his eyes had softened when he spoke about hope and change. It was a feeling that lingered, and it was becoming harder to ignore. But despite the undeniable chemistry between them, Sarah still kept a wall up, one she wasn't sure she was ready to let down. She couldn't risk complicating things with her personal feelings, especially when everything was moving so fast. After that night, they worked even closer together. Sarah found herself more involved in Mark's world than she had ever anticipated. She attended meetings with potential investors and even helped Mark organize charity events that aligned with the project they had both become so passionate about. Their partnership was undeniable. One afternoon, while they were preparing for a large fundraising gala, Mark pulled Sarah aside. "I need to talk to you," he said, his tone serious. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, she could see a flicker of vulnerability that had been hidden beneath his calm exterior. "What's going on?" Sarah asked, her voice gentle, sensing his tension. Mark paused before speaking. "I need to be honest with you, Sarah. There's something I've been holding back, something I've been afraid to share." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She had a sense of what he was about to say, but she had been afraid to ask. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark took a deep breath, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm not just doing this project because I want to help others," he confessed, his voice low. "I've been building my empire for years, but I've realized that the things I've worked for, the wealth, the power, none of it means anything if I don't have someone to share it with." Sarah's heart clenched. She didn't know what to say. She had always believed that people like Mark didn't need anyone, that they were too far removed from the struggles of everyday life. But now, hearing him admit his own loneliness, she realized how wrong she had been. "I've spent so many years hiding behind my success," Mark continued, his voice tinged with regret. "I've pushed people away, and in the process, I've lost sight of what really matters. And you, Sarah, you've reminded me of that. You've shown me what it means to truly care, to give without expecting anything in return. Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. His words were both humbling and overwhelming. She had never imagined that someone like Mark, someone so successful and powerful, would look to her for something more than just professional help. Mark, she started, her voice faltering. You don't need to be alone. You've done so much for others, and you deserve to have someone by your side who truly cares for you. Mark smiled softly, a mixture of sadness and gratitude in his eyes. I don't know how to do that, Sarah. I've spent so much time building this life, but now I'm realizing that it's all empty without someone to share it with. His words hit Sarah harder than she expected. She had spent her life thinking she was invisible, thinking that no one could see her for who she truly was. And now, here was Mark, a man who had everything, telling her that he was just as lost as she had been. It was a revelation that shook her to her core. As the gala approached, Sarah's feelings for Mark only deepened. She spent hours preparing for the event, helping him with the final touches. It was clear that their work together had brought them closer, and the tension between them was undeniable. That night, as they stood side by side at the gala, Sarah could feel the weight of the unspoken words between them. The room was filled with the hum of conversation, the clink of glasses, and the occasional burst of laughter, but all Sarah could focus on was Mark standing next to her. He looked more handsome than ever, his suit tailored perfectly to his frame. But it was the way he looked at her that made her heart race. There was something different in his eyes, something more than just friendship. And for the first time, Sarah allowed herself to acknowledge it. The night went on, and as the evening came to a close, Mark turned to Sarah with a thoughtful expression. Thank you, he said quietly, for everything. For believing in this project, for believing in me. But more than that, thank you for being here. Sarah smiled, feeling the warmth of his words. I'm glad I could help, she replied, her voice soft. Mark took a deep breath, his gaze never leaving hers. Sarah, he said, his voice low, I need to tell you something. Her heart raced as she looked up at him, waiting for him to continue. I don't know what the future holds, Mark began, but I do know that I want to find a way to make this work. Us, together. The words hung in the air, and for a moment, everything else faded away. Sarah could feel her breath catch in her chest. She had never expected this. But in that moment, standing together in the midst of all the glamour and the crowd, she realized that she had found something more than just a career. She had found a connection that went beyond their work, beyond their roles as boss and employee. This was something real, something that had the potential to change everything. The days following the gala were filled with both excitement and confusion for Sarah. Mark had opened up to her in a way that she hadn't expected, confessing his feelings and his hopes for a future together. The words echoed in her mind, stirring something deep inside her. I want to find a way to make this work. Us, together. She couldn't stop thinking about them. The feeling of uncertainty mixed with the thrill of possibility. Could she really let herself be vulnerable with him? Could she trust that what they were building wasn't just another fleeting moment? As much as she wanted to believe it was the start of something real, the walls she had built over the years were not easy to tear down. She had spent so much of her life just surviving, and now, with the chance to thrive, she felt torn between embracing this new chapter and protecting herself from the risk of being hurt. The next week, Sarah found herself standing outside Mark's office again. She had come to a decision. She had to talk to him, to figure out where they both stood. She couldn't keep going on like this, unsure of what she was feeling. As she entered the building, she was met by the usual buzz of activity. The atmosphere in Mark's office had always felt professional, but today, there was an air of anticipation. She was nervous, her heart beating faster with each step toward his office. When she knocked on the door and stepped inside, Mark looked up from his desk, his face lighting up when he saw her. Sarah, he said, his voice warm. I'm glad you're here. I've been wanting to talk to you. I've been thinking a lot, she said, her voice a little shaky. About what we talked about at the gala, about us. Mark stood up from his chair, walking over to her with a concerned expression. Sarah, if you're having second thoughts, I completely understand, he said, his tone gentle. I don't want to rush you into anything you're not ready for. Sarah shook her head. No, it's not that. It's just, I've been through a lot in my life. I've learned to keep my guard up. It's hard for me to just let go and trust someone, even someone like you. Mark nodded, his expression softening. I get it, he said quietly. You don't have to rush. But I want you to know that I'm here, no matter what. I'm not going anywhere. Sarah felt a lump in her throat at his words. There was a sincerity in his voice that made her believe him. She had never met anyone like Mark before. Someone so open, so willing to be vulnerable, someone who was willing to fight for what they wanted. She had spent so many years fighting for herself, but now she was being asked to trust someone else with her heart. It was terrifying, but in that moment, she realized something. She couldn't keep living in fear of what might happen. She had to take a chance. I want to try, she said, her voice firm. I want to see where this goes. With you. Mark's face lit up with a smile that took her breath away. You don't know how much that means to me, he said softly. I promise I'm going to do everything I can to show you how much I care. Sarah smiled, her heart racing. This was it. The beginning of something new. They spent the next few weeks growing even closer. Their relationship deepened as they continued to work together, but now, there was an added layer of intimacy between them. They had become more than just colleagues. There was a tenderness to their interactions, an understanding that hadn't been there before. It wasn't just about the work anymore. It was about them, about building something together. One evening, as they were sitting in the office late, reviewing final plans for the next big community event, Mark reached across the table and took Sarah's hand. She looked up at him, surprised. Sarah, he said, his voice low, there's something I've been wanting to do for a while now. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. What was he about to say? Was this the moment he was going to confess something more? What is it? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark smiled, his eyes filled with affection. I want to take you out. Just the two of us. No work, no distractions. I want to show you that this is real. Sarah's heart swelled at his words. She had been waiting for this moment, but she had never expected it to feel this perfect. She squeezed his hand. I'd like that. The night they spent together was simple but magical. They went to a small, cozy restaurant that Sarah had always wanted to try. As they sat across from each other, sharing stories and laughter, Sarah felt a sense of peace settle over her. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't thinking about the future or what could go wrong. She was just present, enjoying the moment. Mark was the same way. There were no barriers between them, no hesitation. It was as if they had both found something that felt right. After dinner, they walked along the streets, the city lights twinkling above them. Mark stopped in front of a small park, turning to Sarah with a serious look in his eyes. Sarah, he said, I want you to know that I'm committed to making this work. I want us to build something real. I don't want to be just a person in your life. I want to be the person who makes you happy, who supports you, who helps you grow. Sarah's heart swelled. She had never heard words like this before, and in that moment, she realized how much she had been holding back. She had been afraid of opening herself up, of letting someone in. But now, standing here with Mark, she understood that she didn't have to be afraid. I want that too, she said softly. I want to build something real with you. Mark smiled, pulling her close. Then let's do it, he whispered. And for the first time, Sarah truly believed that they could. Together, they could build a future that was full of hope, love, and endless possibilities. The weeks following their first real date together felt like a whirlwind of new beginnings. Sarah found herself settling into her new role, balancing her work for the community project with the growing closeness she shared with Mark. It wasn't just the work that kept her busy, it was the moments between them, small, intimate moments that made her heart flutter. They had developed a rhythm, a partnership both in and out of the office. Mark had become her confidant, her sounding board, and her friend. But more than that, he had become someone she trusted deeply, someone who made her feel seen in a way she had never felt before. Yet, despite the growing intimacy between them, Sarah couldn't help but feel a lingering fear. It was a fear that she hadn't realized was still there until one quiet afternoon, as they were wrapping up a meeting at Mark's office. Sarah looked over at Mark, watching him as he worked. He seemed so confident, so sure of himself in every decision he made. But that confidence only made Sarah's insecurities grow. She had spent most of her life questioning her worth, wondering if she was good enough, if she deserved the opportunities that had come her way. And now, as she stood beside Mark, a man who had everything she had ever dreamed of, she couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't quite belong in his world. Hey, Mark said, noticing her distracted expression. He leaned back in his chair and smiled at her. "What's on your mind?" Sarah hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to voice the doubts that had been swirling in her head. I don't know," she began, her voice quiet. "I've always worked so hard to get where I am, but sometimes I feel like I don't really deserve this. Like I don't belong here." Mark's smile softened, and he stood up, walking over to her. He reached out and gently lifted her chin so that she was looking at him. "Sarah," he said, his voice steady, "you belong here because you've earned it. I've watched you work. I've seen how much passion you put into everything you do. You have a heart that's rare, and that's what makes you so valuable, not just to me, but to everyone around you." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat at his words. She wanted to believe him, but the voice in her head kept telling her that she wasn't enough. Mark must have sensed the doubt in her eyes, because he continued, "Look, I know I come from a world that's different from yours, but that doesn't mean you're any less than me. In fact, you're more than I could have ever imagined." The sincerity in his voice was so genuine that Sarah felt her defenses start to crumble. She wanted to believe him, but the fear still lingered. Mark's hand remained on her chin, his thumb gently brushing her skin as if to reassure her. "You've never had anyone tell you that, have you?" he asked softly. Sarah swallowed, shaking her head. "No, I've always had to prove myself." "Well, I'm telling you now," Mark said, his voice firm but kind. "You don't have to prove anything to me, and you don't have to prove anything to anyone else. You're more than enough just as you are." The words hit Sarah harder than she expected. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting them sink in. For so long, she had believed that her worth was tied to her accomplishments, that she had to keep working harder and harder to earn people's respect. But now, standing here with Mark, she realized that maybe it was okay to just be herself. She didn't have to be perfect. She didn't have to carry the weight of her past anymore. Mark's presence was grounding, and the love and care he showed her felt like a safety net she never thought she could have. But with each passing day, it became more and more clear that this wasn't just a passing moment. It was something real, something worth fighting for. The following weekend, Sarah joined Mark for a charity event they had been planning for weeks. It was a fundraiser for the community project, and Sarah had helped organize it from the ground up. As they arrived at the venue together, Sarah noticed how Mark's presence seemed to light up the room. People greeted him with respect, their eyes filled with admiration. He was everything she had ever imagined him to be: confident, successful, and powerful. But there was something else too. He wasn't just a businessman or a billionaire. He was a man who cared deeply about the people around him, a man who valued kindness and generosity above all else. Sarah watched as Mark moved through the crowd, shaking hands, exchanging smiles, and making people feel seen. It was a side of him she hadn't seen before, but it made her respect him even more. When the event started, Mark stood on stage to give a speech. Sarah stood to the side, watching him with pride. She had helped him get to this point, and it filled her with a sense of accomplishment. But as Mark spoke, she couldn't help but feel a swell of emotion. He spoke not just about the project, but about the people who had made it possible, the volunteers, the donors, and especially Sarah. "None of this would have been possible without Sarah," Mark said, his voice ringing through the microphone. "She's the heart and soul of this project, and I can't thank her enough for everything she's done." Sarah felt her cheeks flush at his words. She wasn't used to being in the spotlight, especially not for something like this. But Mark's words felt different. They weren't just praise. They were a recognition of who she was as a person, not just as someone who worked hard. As the night went on, Sarah realized that this was more than just a partnership. It was something deeper. Mark didn't just admire her work. He admired her. And in that moment, Sarah understood that she wasn't just building a future for the project. She was building a future for herself, with Mark by her side. As the event wrapped up, Mark found Sarah in the crowd. He smiled at her, his eyes filled with pride. "You did it," he said softly, his voice full of warmth. "We did it," Sarah replied, her heart swelling with gratitude. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe that everything she had worked for was worth it. Because, with Mark, she had found more than just success. She had found love, trust, and a future she never thought possible. As Sarah walked back to her apartment after another successful day at work, her mind was filled with a mix of emotions. The community project was growing more successful every day, and her relationship with Mark was deeper than ever. but something inside her felt unsettled. The pride she had in her accomplishments, both professionally and personally, was undeniable. But the lingering doubt, the fear that had kept her guarded for so long, still hadn't fully dissipated. Was she truly ready to commit to a future with Mark? Or was she just afraid of losing herself in it? Over the past few months, she had become so comfortable with the idea of being with Mark. They had shared late-night talks, planning the future, and discussing their dreams. He had shown her a side of love that she had never known. But now, as the future seemed so bright, the fear of vulnerability crept back in. Mark had been nothing but open and supportive, yet Sarah couldn't shake the voice inside her head telling her that she wasn't enough. She had always relied on herself, always been the one to take charge of her life. But now, in this relationship with Mark, she was being asked to trust someone with her heart, and it was the hardest thing she had ever done. Later that evening, Mark invited her to dinner at a small Italian restaurant, one they had passed by many times but never entered. The cozy, dimly lit place felt warm, and as soon as they were seated, Sarah felt the tension in her shoulders ease. Mark's presence always had a calming effect on her, but tonight, there was a different energy. Something in the air felt heavier, and she could sense it in Mark's eyes. He was looking at her with a kind of intensity she hadn't seen before. "Is everything okay?" Sarah asked, her voice soft. Mark took a deep breath, setting down his glass of water before speaking. "Actually, there's something I need to say." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. It was the kind of sentence that made her stomach twist. She couldn't help but wonder if this was the moment he was going to tell her that he was ready to walk away, that he had found someone else, or that the connection between them wasn't as strong as she thought. But when he looked at her, his eyes were filled with nothing but sincerity. "I've been thinking a lot about us," he continued, his voice low and steady. "About how we've built something so real together. I'm not someone who's easily vulnerable, but with you, I feel like I can be." Sarah felt a rush of emotion at his words, but she held herself back. This wasn't the time to let her guard down completely, not yet. "I feel the same way," she said softly, but the doubt in her heart remained. Mark reached across the table, gently taking her hand in his. "Sarah, I know I've been distant in the past, and I've worked hard to build this life. But you've shown me that there's more to life than just success and wealth. There's love, there's connection, and there's you." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark squeezed her hand, a small smile on his lips. "I'm saying that I want us to build something real. Not just in our work, but in our lives. I want to be with you, Sarah. For all the reasons that go beyond our professional connection. I want to share my life with you, completely." Sarah's heart fluttered in her chest, but the hesitation she felt was still there. Could she truly open herself up to this? Could she really be the woman Mark wanted her to be? She had spent so long keeping her emotions buried, afraid of getting hurt, afraid of letting someone in. And now, here was Mark, asking her to take that leap. Mark, Sarah started, but she trailed off, unsure of how to put her feelings into words. She wanted to say yes, she really did. She wanted to believe that this was the kind of love that lasted. But the fear that had held her back for so long made it difficult to take the final step. Mark looked at her with understanding, his expression softening. "Sarah, I'm not asking for perfection. I'm just asking for a chance. We can take this slow, one step at a time. But I need you to know that I'm here, and I'm all in." His words hit Sarah like a wave. She had been so afraid of losing herself, of becoming consumed by someone else. But in that moment, she realized that being with Mark didn't mean losing herself. It meant trusting in something new, something that was different from anything she had known before. She had the power to shape this relationship, to make it what she wanted it to be. And Mark wasn't asking her to be anyone but herself. "I don't want to lose what we have," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "But I'm scared, Mark. I've never let anyone in like this before." Mark reached over and gently cupped her face in his hands. "You don't have to be scared, Sarah. I'm not going anywhere. I want you to be you, just as you are." Sarah felt her breath catch in her throat. The words, the sincerity in his eyes, it all felt so real. For the first time, she felt like she could take a chance. On love, on herself, and on him. "Okay," she whispered, her heart swelling with emotion. "Let's do this. Together." And as they sat there, holding hands across the table, Sarah knew that this was the beginning of something new. Something that was real, something that was built on trust, vulnerability, and love. She wasn't afraid anymore. She was ready. As the days passed, Sarah and Mark's relationship continued to evolve in ways that neither of them had anticipated. After their heartfelt conversation at the restaurant, they both seemed to take a deep breath, allowing themselves to fully embrace what was happening between them. It was no longer just about the project or the charity events. They were building something far more significant. They were building a life together, one step at a time. They took things slow, but there was a new kind of closeness between them that was impossible to ignore. For Sarah, each moment felt like a revelation. She had always been independent, fiercely protective of her own heart. But with Mark, she began to feel something she had never allowed herself to feel before, a sense of trust. Mark, too, seemed to let down the walls he had built over the years. His carefully curated life, built on success and ambition, now had a new dimension to it, love. Not just the love for the work they did together, but something deeper, something that made him believe in the possibility of a future beyond wealth and achievement. As time went on, Mark invited Sarah to more and more personal events. There were dinners with friends, evenings spent walking through the city, and lazy Sundays where they just enjoyed each other's company. It was clear to both of them that this was more than just a fleeting romance. It was something real, something worth fighting for. But just as Sarah had begun to feel truly at peace with their relationship, the world around them started to shift. One afternoon, Sarah received a call from her mother. Her voice, usually full of energy, was strained. "Sarah, honey, I need you to come home. Your father, he's not doing well." Sarah's heart sank. Her father had been battling illness for years, but she hadn't realized how much worse it had gotten. "I'm coming right now," she said, her voice shaking. She hung up the phone and immediately started gathering her things. Mark, who had been working from home that day, noticed her sudden rush. "Sarah, what's going on?" he asked, his brow furrowing with concern. "It's my dad," she replied, trying to stay calm. "He's really sick. I need to go see him." Mark stood up immediately, walking over to her. "I'll go with you," he said, his voice steady. "You don't have to go through this alone." Sarah looked at him, surprised. "Mark, I appreciate it, but this is something I need to do with my family." Mark nodded, understanding her need for space, but he didn't back down. "I know, Sarah, but I want you to know I'm here, no matter what. I'll drive you to the hospital. You don't have to carry everything by yourself." Sarah felt a swell of emotion in her chest. She had never felt so supported, so cared for. And yet the thought of her father's condition weighed heavily on her. "Okay," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you." The drive to her parents' house was quiet, the tension in the air palpable. Sarah couldn't help but feel the weight of what was happening. Her father had always been the rock of their family, and now to see him so fragile, it was almost too much to bear. When they arrived at the hospital, Sarah's mother greeted them with tears in her eyes. "Sarah, I'm so glad you're here," she said, pulling her daughter into a tight hug. "Your father, he's asking for you." Sarah's heart broke at the sight of her mother's tears. She could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the toll that caring for her father had taken on her. Mark stood by Sarah's side, offering quiet support. "I'm here if you need anything," he whispered, his presence a steadying force. Sarah nodded, squeezing his hand before walking into her father's room. The sight of him lying in the bed, his face pale and drawn, made her throat tighten. "Dad?" she said softly, taking a seat next to him. Her father's eyes fluttered open, and a weak smile spread across his face. "Sarah, my girl," he whispered, his voice raspy. "I'm so glad you're here." Sarah held his hand, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm here, Dad. I'm here," she whispered, fighting back the sobs. The next few days were a blur of hospital visits, late-night conversations with her mother, and the overwhelming sense of helplessness that came with watching a loved one fade. But through it all, Mark remained by her side. He didn't try to fix things or take over. He simply showed up when she needed him, offering his quiet strength. He understood that this was a family moment, and he respected that. But when the moments of grief felt too heavy to bear, he was there to lean on. As the days went by, Sarah began to reflect on everything that had happened over the past year. She had found a love she never expected, built a career she was proud of, and now, she was learning how to navigate loss. It was a difficult lesson, one that she didn't feel ready for, but Mark's unwavering support made it a little easier. At the hospital, when Sarah's father's condition worsened, she felt as though her world was crashing down. It was in that moment, surrounded by family and with Mark by her side, that Sarah realized how much love had entered her life. The love she had given, the love she had received, and the love she now shared with Mark were things that could not be taken away. They were the things that truly mattered. And as they faced this uncertain moment together, Sarah knew that with Mark, she had found something that could withstand any storm. The loss of her father would be hard, but the love and support of those around her, especially Mark, would carry her through. The journey they had started together was just beginning, and no matter what came next, Sarah knew they would face it together, stronger than ever. The weeks following Sarah's father's passing were a time of deep reflection. She had always prided herself on her strength, her independence, but the loss of her father left an undeniable void. Yet, as difficult as it was, she had found solace in the love and support Mark had given her. His steady presence had been a comfort, a reminder that she wasn't alone. He had shown her that, even in the most challenging times, love could be a source of healing. Mark had always been a pillar of strength in Sarah's life, but in the days after the funeral, she realized how much he had become a part of her healing process. He never tried to rush her, never pushed her to move past her grief too quickly. Instead, he gave her the space she needed, while also being there when she needed him most. They spent quiet evenings together, sometimes in complete silence, simply being in each other's company. There were moments when they would walk through the city, and Sarah would find herself looking at Mark, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude for him. His understanding and patience had given her the freedom to grieve, but also the strength to move forward. She had never experienced love like this before, love that wasn't just about the good times, but about showing up when it mattered most. As the months passed, Sarah continued to find her way through the pain of loss, but with Mark by her side, the road ahead seemed a little less daunting. Their bond deepened, becoming more than just a partnership. It became a promise. They both knew that life would continue to throw challenges their way, but they also knew that they were stronger together. One evening, Mark invited Sarah to dinner at the same Italian restaurant where they had shared their first true moment of connection. It had become their place, a symbol of their relationship, where it all started, and where they had grown together. As they sat down at the table, the familiar warmth of the restaurant enveloped them, and Sarah couldn't help but feel that this moment, too, was another step in their journey. Mark reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "Sarah," he said, his voice full of sincerity, "I know we've been through a lot, but I want to tell you something I've been thinking for a long time." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She had learned to listen to Mark's words, to understand the depth of what he said. This was no ordinary conversation. It was something more. "What is it?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. Mark smiled, his eyes warm and full of love. "I love you, Sarah, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I don't just want to be with you through the good times, but through everything. I want to build a future with you, one that's filled with love, trust, and everything we've dreamed of." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She had been waiting for this moment, and yet, the overwhelming emotion of it left her speechless. She had never imagined that someone would look at her, with all her flaws, all her baggage, and love her so completely. Mark squeezed her hand, his expression full of hope. "Will you marry me, Sarah?" The words hung in the air, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. Sarah looked into Mark's eyes, seeing the man who had been there for her through everything. She saw the love they had built together, the trust they had shared, and the future they were ready to create. Her heart swelled with emotion. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. "Yes, I will marry you." The relief and joy that flooded Mark's face was indescribable. He stood up, pulling Sarah into a tight embrace. "I can't believe this is real," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I can't believe you're mine." They stood there, in the middle of the restaurant, holding each other, as the world around them continued on. In that moment, it didn't matter what had come before, or what challenges they would face in the future. What mattered was that they had found each other, and together, they would face whatever came next. The proposal was the beginning of a new chapter in their lives, one that was filled with hope and the promise of love. As they left the restaurant, hand in hand, Sarah felt a sense of peace she had never known before. She had found someone who loved her unconditionally, who had shown her that no matter what happened, they could face it together. The road ahead was still uncertain, but with Mark by her side, Sarah knew that they could build a future filled with all the love and happiness they had ever dreamed of. And as they walked through the streets of the city, she couldn't help but think that, perhaps, this was the kind of love that lasted a lifetime. It was a love that had been built on trust, on kindness, and on the courage to be vulnerable with one another. It was the kind of love that made Sarah believe in the possibility of a happy ending, a love that was worth fighting for, no matter what came their way. And as Mark squeezed her hand, Sarah knew that the best was yet to come.